Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out. The best way to do that is two forms here. First form, email. Second, fill up those comments on YouTube. I'm on YouTube, and I'm greatly appreciative to have the opportunity to be on YouTube. Mix it up with the perspective and light here. And don't be shy. Get in those comments. Tell me what you think. All right, so I'm pretty much on all of the audio platforms, and I'm working to expand out and keep a lookout on that. When you hear advertisement and everything about my podcast, that's coming up, so I will let you know about that. All right, so it's Friday. That means I'm focusing on all of you, and keeping up with the new theme. I'm going to focus on literature this time with this aspect here. And so I am going to talk about British literature and give my thoughts. All right, here we go. All right, so British lit. There is, my goodness, a facet of examples of how influential artists and work has came out of this country. And I'm immensely appreciative. It's something it's something for people to listen to you from your own country, but to have so many different other variations of countries listening to me, that means a lot, and I really appreciate all of y'all. And so, being an American, there's roots about the British. Specifically, our founding fathers here had British ties, were British people. And now there's different perspectives about the aspects of British culture. Some not very favorable, some are. And the elements in which those things are expressed, I think, are generally taken in a new light when it comes to literature. So what do I mean by these concepts here? So with literature, for good or for worse, it really is a micro-focused lens on culture, of the culture at large. And there was an array of different aspects to prove that point here. So for instance, Charles Dickens. Now, he's one of the most notable figures in literary work known in our lifetimes and so forth. And why is that? His works really delve deep into the aspects of what can go awry with, the aristocrat, what can go awry with the aspects of industrialized societies and keeping up with that and the division between that. And two examples to uphold these realities or fictional realities here is one, Oliver Twist, and two, A Christmas Carol from Charles Dickens. Now, in Oliver Twist, it centers around the aspects of just this, what do you do when you hold on to hope when there really is none, and how to get on the other side of that. Whereas Charles Dickens, with Scrooge, with the character Ebenezer, and all of the other Tiny Tim and so forth, to challenge him and his worldviews. It's all about, what do you do when you have everything and you don't see that your selfishness or self-worth can conflict you from really being involved with everything else around you. And so there's other countless examples of this case where, we get into the English Renaissance period when we talk about the well-renowned William Shakespeare. Now, I don't know, it's really a little bit much to me personally, when you become an adult and then, okay, so what I'm talking about here. I'm not going to get off in a tangent. This makes sense here. So, for instance, the movie when I was a child coming up in the 90s, which, they were on something where something illegal was going on. That substances were being taken when Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes' depiction of Romeo and Juliet was made. Because the concept is weird anyway, about the aspects of going to the extremes to prove the point of your devotion and love for another person. But, just like I'm saying, being introduced to stuff like this as a child or a teenager, I think we should wait until, you have breathing room to enter your adulthood here. And there was a lot of concepts like that, too, with William Shakespeare. Some were nuanced, some were very varied. And the concept of, establishment and worth and all these kind of things. But for the most part, his tragedies and comedies and sonnets and all of these things here really delve deep within the aspects of the human condition. So, Bronte, Emily, I think she was English. I had to double check. And T.S. Eliot. Excuse me, I'll be right back. Marco Polo. Okay. All right. So, these two figures here. Now, as I mentioned earlier about T.S. Eliot and Bronte and so forth, other figures like her and him, they deeply, deeply so elegant in how profound the concepts of love and loss and how that interweaves itself in relationships or whether it be interpersonal, whether it be associations through interpersonal because of work and so forth. So many different layers to it. And they both, more from a female point of view with Bronte, but T.S. Eliot collectively, his work was all centered around the aspects of, sometimes, and I think those elements are not really showcased so much to where, in this day and time, to where it's more, showcased in a comedic point of view where, essentially people who, attempt to have emotional understanding for something, but it's just, you can label it as dissociative, not dissociative, antisocial behavior, or a lot of psychological psychosis, mental instabilities or mental illnesses with that underlies. But, now it's really written off as some kind of comedic elements. But T.S. Eliot, in his wisdom of choice to write and his chosen platform, was saying, now let's say it's an honor and a curse to be able to merge the things together, but to understand the other side of it. For once, what does that mean? What am I saying here? So for one, there's a difference between a person who knows themselves and is understanding of themselves, of where they can't form, genuine interpersonal relationship. The level isn't there, but they attempt to try to pick up the pieces between those things. And then versus one who's not self-aware, he just is blatant about it, and just, it doesn't matter. And he didn't talk about these elements in everything that he wrote, but those different perspectives of trying to overcome some sort of obstacle was very remnant in a lot of his works. So, why do I bring all these elements up here? And then I'm going to lead into, facts about British literature. This is the reasons why. Now, Ricky Gervais is a very good example to exemplify what I mean here. So, Ricky Gervais, his comedic timing, the things he's said and done, his body of work is really, even though it's in a comedic realm, it's really refreshing in the aspects of reality. Because he and others like him, whether they be British or so forth, are reasonable enough to understand that when you have an opportunity for people to listen to you, you should really say what you think and mean. And so, a really good point of this is the British, when he originally came out with The Office versus the American version of The Office. Now, from my point of view, the American version of The Office, it was at its best when Steve Carell was playing Michael Scott here. All right, so Ricky Gervais. He was very honest about the depictions of the ins and outs about office life. Even the aspects of politics, he was very honest about that. And then, when he was chosen to be the host of, I think it was the Golden Globes or something like that. And, he was calling people out for, in the Holly weird, as it's coined, for what it is. That's really something. And that was genuine. And then, this artificial fake bull crap of, being, a battle cry or social justice warrior, as it was coined, not too long after it and so forth. It's all diluted because it's a self-righteous thing. It's not really helpful for anything. So this leads to my point about the cultural map in which is going on, and particularly in the British culture here. It's really sad to say. And then, there's other countries that go along the lines of this. But in Britain, it's more pronounced here. Where you can be jailed for speaking your mind. You can't, and that's really something to say that, just being honest or calling things for what they are, you're persecuted for it. You can't really, go against the allegiance. Now, as in America, when people are pushing for control like this, what does that mean about the preservation of our own means of self-expression? It's something to think about. All right, so with this said, hey, I'm getting into the facts here. Okay, so here we go. Pull it right up. All right, so here we go. Now, English literature. So the body of written works produced by the English language by inhabitants of the British Isles include Ireland from the 7th century to the present day. So major literaries written in English outside of the British Isles are treated separately under American literature, Australian literature, Canadian literature, and New Zealand literature. And I'll get into these, of course, when I get into other countries. But next week, I'm going to focus on specific periods of British literature. Today, it's a survey. All right, so English literature has sometimes been stigmatized as insular. It can be argued that no single English novel attains the University of Russian writer Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, or French writer Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary. Yet in the Middle Ages, the Old English literature of the subjugated Saxons was leavened by the Latin and Anglo-Norman writings entirely foreign in origin, in which the churchmen and Norman conquerors expressed themselves. From this combination emerged a flexible and subtle subtle linguistic instrument exploited by, they say, with Geoffrey Chaucer, who wrote the Canterbury Tales here, and brought to supreme application by William Shakespeare. So during the Renaissance, the English Renaissance here, the renewed interest in classical learning and values had an important effect on English literature. Why is that? As on all of the arts and ideas of the Augustan literary party in the 18th century, and a reference in the 19th century for a less specific thought skills selectively view classical antiquity, which continued to shape the literature. All right, so all three of these impulsive derivements from a foreign source, namely the Mediterranean basin. So the descendants of the late 19th century and the modernists of the early 20th century look to the continental European individuals and movements for inspirations. All right, so that's how you get the aspects of different, before the Romanticism, you get in the aspects of patriotism and writings and all these sort of ideas, weighing back into the literary purpose of expressing these humanities or these idealized theories of how people view themselves in the way of life here. All right, so and then I don't know. Let's just go. That goes without saying with the territorial literature, because literature in itself is supposed to be an expression of who am I, the human thought of where am I, where's my fate in the world, and all of these philosophical meanings. Writing helps to be a medium to express these things, either formally or informally here. All right, so all three of these, like I said, impulse derived from a foreign source, namely from the Mediterranean basin. So the decadents of the late 19th century and the modernists of the earlier 20th century looked to continental European individuals and movements for inspiration. So, nor was attraction towards European intellectualism dead by the late 20th century. So by the time the mid-1980s approached, it was known as more writing with structuralism. This was a phenomenon periodically as shown in French and German origins, which infused the very study of English literature itself in a host of published critical studies and university departments. Additional influences were exercised by destructuralism and the analysis of it, based largely on the work of French philosopher Jacques Derrida. Further, British past imperial activities around the globe continue to inspire literature, in some cases wishful, in other cases hostile. So finally, English literature has enjoyed a certain diffusion abroad, not only in predominantly English-speaking countries, but also in those others where English is the first choice of study as a second language. English literature is therefore not so much insular as detached from the continental European tradition across the Channel. It is strong in all the conventional categories of the book's seller's list. So, for instance, in Shakespeare, it has dramatists of world renown. In poetry, a genre notoriously resistant to translation and therefore difficult to compare with the poetry of other literature. It is also particularly rich as its merit includes the front rank, which English literature's humor has been found as hard to convey to foreigners as poetry. And what they're saying to wrap all this up, there's a highly elevated structuralized sophistication with British humor. Now, it's not for everyone, especially with modern British humor. It can be, at times, dry and kind of I guess dry is the best way, or deadpan. But, there's variations in that. And, there's to each his own. So, English literature, remarkable body of with the let me go back here. So, bestowal of the label idiocentric English literature, remarkable body of traveling writings constitutes another charge of attitudes about it in autobiography, biography, and historical writing. English literature compares with the best of any culture. Also, when it includes children's literature, fantasy essays, and journals, which tend to be considered minor genres, are all fields of exceptional achievements as regards into English literature. Even in philosophical writings, populated through as hard to combine with literature of value, such as Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, David Hume, John Stuart Mill, and Bernard Russell. They stand comparison of lucidity and grace with the best of the French philosophers and masters of classic antiquity. Some of English literature's most distinguished practitioners in the 20th century are Joseph Conrad, as it begins to the V.S. Naipaul, and Tom Stoppard, as it ends, were born outside of the British Isles. What is more known for the aforementioned had much in common with the adoptive country as it did. All right, so I am going to get into some last final thoughts here. All right, so let me end on this. All right, so now, and I think this goes without saying with a lot of literature, I find it quite interesting when it comes to the aspects of religion and monarchy and so forth, that was highly influenced and a source of inspiration for a lot of early work that came out of English lit. And these variations really establish itself into the means of expression of how other people feel about their disposition about everything. So what am I saying about this here? When it comes to fairy tales, or when it comes to talking about historical accounts of literature, or it comes from, again, quoting the works of William Shakespeare again, when it comes to themes and ideas like, anywhere from Othello, Macbeth, and Hamlet. Now, common bond between all three of them is the state of power. But what's different is what each of these men do with the state of power. One theme with Othello is about what do you do when you're being driven by sort of being deluded with what you think you perceive reality is versus what's actually going on. With Macbeth, when the ideas presented in that has to do with the matriarchy versus the patriarchy, and then with Lady Macbeth asserting her power and because she was let's call it for what it is. She was one of those where, they want to say female bosses or whatever, they want to present nowadays. But she was really ambitious to the point that any means necessary, which means death. So take that for what you will. And then Hamlet, the complex in which he was dealing with, which is, even the world of psychology now, Sigmund Freud is widely discredited. But, there's other variations of, study within this, with having Oedipus complex in Hamlet, and, the whole concept, too, of Hamlet in itself, being able to see all different sides of views of everything, to where it makes him metaphorically an iceberg, to where he just can't do anything. And so all of these elements here, they pinpoint a lot into the variations in the elements of the English culture and what has been contributed to literature, for the most part. And then, you take things for with a grain of salt, but it's just very interesting, the body of work that came out of England. Okay, so with this said, feel free to reach out to me, and the best way to do so is for 1, email, and for 2, YouTube. Tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. Bye-bye for now.